Welcome to the Everything Apartments podcast. I'm your host, Eric Christopher. And on this podcast, we cover all topics of multifamily investments, from buying and financing properties, day-to-day operations and management, and also reinvestment strategies. This is episode 21 of the podcast. We have a whole bunch of great back episodes to explore. So scroll down in whatever podcast platform you're using here. And we've got a lot of different topics and some great guests covering those topics like we do today. It's no secret that our state and cities like Long Beach are severely underhoused. Some estimates cite as many as 3 to 4 million doors short across the state. Now, we could talk all day about why that is and why there's so much difficulty and cost prohibition to break ground here. But today we're going to focus on a much more positive initiative that can help ease that shortage a little bit and also benefit landlords in the process. It's really unheard of that the government would make it easy to add additional units to your property, but ADUs are in fact just that, a way to do that in pretty simple fashion. Today, we'll take a brief dive into ADUs, and we have with us Helen Fowler, who is a principal of One Structural Incorporated here in Los Angeles. One Structural has a division called ADU1, where they assist property owners from start to finish in adding an ADU to their properties. Helen, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you for having me. Happy to be here to talk about mainly, multifamily ADUs.
How did you arrive at what you're doing relative to like ADUs? For example, I think you mentioned it's a family business like you. So just real quick, like sociology major, you graduated from college.
So I actually did. I got my master's in clinical psych, so I kept going. The family business aspect is my husband. He's the principal, one of the principals of the company. It started around 10 years ago or so. So he was always doing this with his partners and everything. And I, still did my background. And after we had, I think our second kid, it just made sense to hop on board a few years ago. I always helped out kind of behind the scenes, but it didn't really, maybe a little over 3 years ago, just kind of made more sense to join the team full time. So I did. I made the switch, learned everything I could. And from there, we were just doing restoration, reconstruction, a lot of that stuff for multifamily properties, seismic retrofitting. We're doing a lot of that, which is also for multifamily properties. And then once I joined the team, was doing that. And when the ADU laws came out in 2020, I helped spearhead that entire division to open up to ADUs. Specifically, again, for multifamily properties, since that was always our expertise.
Excellent. Okay, so that's a great tie-in. It may be fun to come back in a future episode and just drill down on the seismic retrofit and the balcony stuff, because I know like my Long Beach owners here, they own in other cities, right? There's a lot of them that just own here, but there's a great portion that own all over the Southland and may be faced with that challenge now. And perhaps in Long Beach, we could be faced with it citywide at some point. So maybe we can have you back.
Yeah, sure. The retrofitting itself isn't mandated, but the balcony inspection is statewide. So it does affect Long Beach. So that was passed in 2019. So the balcony and deck inspections are for any building with 3 or more units.
So as we know, the ADU guidelines came down in 2020, I believe.
Yes.
Just real quick, because we don't have to take too much time on this. How did that process come about? Because you don't normally see the government giving you entitlement to add units, add square footage in sort of a streamlined fashion. Can you point to like maybe 1 or 2 were there people lobbying for this, or like how did it actually evolve?
Sure. So historically, ADUs were, I guess, semi always permitted, but mainly for single family homes, like granny flats, in-law suites, that kind of stuff. However, there was always a lot of red tape, obstacles, and restrictions regarding development and permitting these units. So the last several years, California, I think that everybody can see housing. There's a housing crisis. There's a housing shortage. Rental prices, everything just related around real estate has been, significantly affected the last few years. So California as a whole, and as a big initiative to increase housing, did the amendment and revision to the original ADU laws in 2020 to eliminate a lot of that red tape, The biggest piece I feel is allowing it in multifamily properties now. So at this point, California just really is putting the pressure down on cities and counties. I believe each city or county has a certain quota even that they have to hit of new housing by a certain year. So that's where the ADUs came into play.
So that's an interesting point that they have a quota. Now, I did read back in 2020, I read the state guidelines, and I remember that mentioning that they expressly stated that local municipalities can't interfere too much, but we all know what the local municipalities, they love to interfere with everything, especially when it's with a business owner. But how do the state guidelines coexist with a place like Long Beach in what they try to manipulate it into or change it or restrict it? What does that look like here?
Yeah, so good question. So the state law, was developed, and that's kind of the head of the umbrella, I guess. And what they are saying is that all cities and counties must approve these ADUs. Most, if not all, properties are entitled and allowed to have at least one ADU. And what they are allowing the local municipalities to do is basically use this, these umbrella guidelines, and you have to at least allow the minimum. So in terms of quantity or locations and configurations, the cities, as much control as they can have is they have to allow at least some of those. They don't have to allow every single type or number of. However, they still must allow some of those at the bare minimum of what the state is requiring.
Have you had any locking of horns with the local municipalities in the way of, hey, you all are putting too many roadblocks up, this isn't permitted by the state guidelines, you'd better back down? Has there been any of those little bit more confrontational interactions you've had at all, or is it pretty standardized at this point?
In most places, it's pretty standardized. The only area that I would say has more of a grip or hold with the state not superseding their rules have been the Coastal Commission. So one of the big areas, which maybe we can get into in a little more detail later, but one of the big areas is parking, since the state is allowing you to convert garages and carports, therefore eliminating some of the once required parking for the property. Most areas are going with that, except Coastal Commission. Coastal Commission, a lot of them are requiring that you still maintain the same number of existing parking spots. So they will not allow you to do that ADU, to convert and remove it unless you at least relocate it or maintain somehow those parking spots. So that's been the main one of I wouldn't say difficulty, because we already know this at this point, but in terms of some type of local governing area putting their foot down for something.
So it sounds as though in that little scenario that the Coastal Commission trumps the state. I mean, has there been any legal action, for example, between those two ideas?
Not that we've been involved with, at least. We're not going to go there. I mean, if the Coastal Commission is saying, you have to maintain it, then we will just let our clients know, and we'll work around that and let them know what's actually feasible. So we have not pushed those boundaries as of yet. I would say another large one that there are some boundaries being pushed, and it's in legislation, I think, right now, are the height restrictions. So California did impose a minimum, which is 16 feet. And unfortunately, what happened is a lot of, local municipalities took that as, okay, 16 feet's the maximum. That really hinders building second story ADUs, for example. So there are a lot of initiatives right now to get those 16 feet increased. And again, it's, I believe it may have already passed the Senate, or it's going to, something like that, to at least raise it to 18 feet, which those 2 feet will make a significant impact on the development. So I know that's actually one that is being fought right now. In terms of like Coastal Commission and parking, to my knowledge, there isn't any. I don't know of anybody else who's fighting that.
Got it. Okay, so both single family and multifamily inclusive in the ADU process. What's the most common type? Is it on the single family side, or do you see the multifamily folks gravitating to it more?
Both. There's really such a large interest for both single family property owners as well as multifamily. Multifamily, it's huge since, again, this is the first time historically that they can even increase their unit count in their apartment building. So the requests for that are really endless. So that's really awesome with those types of leads. And single family homes with, I mean, the ability to now potentially be a landlord, offset their mortgage, and really help with those payments. A lot of single family owners are doing this, or just the fact that it's even easier to do. And now they can move in their elderly parents or college age children who can't afford, rent outside. There are just luckily so many useful purposes for these ADUs that really, I feel between both types, everybody's jumping on board.
For multifamily, what are the most common? Is it actually converting garages, or is it going above garages? What are you seeing in the multifamily side most commonly?
I'd say the most common request is preservation of parking. So building on top, doing second story, either building on top of existing garages or carports, or if you have open uncovered lot, building a new carport with the 1 to 2 units on top. That is our most requested configuration.
Funny, when I first read the state guidelines, I didn't know whether a property I managed would be candidate or not based on the distance to public transportation. So I naturally thought, because the property I'm talking about is near the blue line, and it's kind of between the Willow Station and the Long Beach Boulevard Station, if you know where I'm talking about. I thought, oh, darn it, it's a little too far. And then I talked to somebody, this was back in 20, and they go, oh no, it just has to be by a bus stop. So I think most properties, especially like in a city like Long Beach, would satisfy that requirement of having a bus stop within, I think it's 500 feet or something like that. So
exactly, within a half mile, actually. So within a half mile, most multifamily properties, I would say 99%, if not all, meet that requirement. And that's just one of the exemptions. So most of them do. Only every now and then we'll see a single family home, maybe more rural or up in the hills, that don't. But for single family homes, you can have an uncovered spot on the driveway if needed. But most properties meet that exemption and do not have to add or replace parking.
excellent. So I want to take us through the process of doing this. Obviously, we'll keep it brief, but we'll go kind of A, B, C, D in a second. But first, I'll tell you about our firm, WCC Realty Advisors and WCC Property Management. WCC has been helping buyers and sellers and managing properties in Long Beach for over 15 years. If you're tired of managing your units or just not getting the results you want, we can help. WCC never wants to be the biggest firm in Long Beach. Instead, we stay smaller, more agile, and that brings the quality that you want. We can also help you if you're looking to acquire more units here, or maybe an exchange scenario to an out-of-state market. Visit WSC-PM.com. Call, text, or email us. All that information is in the show notes. Mention the Everything Apartments podcast and get your first 2 months of management absolutely free. Whatever your challenge with your property is, WSC has the solution. So getting back, let's say I call you and I say, I want an ADU. Just kind of give me the bullet points on what happens next. I'm super excited. I think my property might fit. How do you get that on the conveyor belt?
Sure. So usually most, if not all of our leads get passed through me, actually, to at least review feasibility. So I will let whomever the salesperson is that's going to work with them, whether it's me or one of my colleagues, I will go over with them the full feasibility of the property for, what are their options. If the owner has kind of an ideal ADU that they want to do. Like, I cannot lose parking. I need to either convert the storage or build on top. Then we'll only focus on those. So we'll let them know feasibility, locations of where it could go. We have some kind of programs that we use virtually that allows us to also, they have measuring tools, and we can kind of get a 3D image of the whole property. So that's just kind of the first rough screening to just see, does it qualify for the ADUs? Most properties do, but especially if you're leaning towards a certain type, we help you from there. Once that's kind of done, we will either meet you at the property if you want to move forward. We'll meet you there to confirm all of those measurements, check for existing site conditions, and just really review the space. If they're, for conversions, we just make sure it meets the minimum ceiling height. Are there any gas lines or plumbing pipes in the way? Stuff like that, those logistics. Detached, we'll check out the full area of where you want it. Then we will review based on what you choose, what size you want. We can let you know, obviously, the quote and estimate for the work.
So along the process, is there a submittal where you do an initial inquiry, or are you folks done enough of these? Like when is it that we start asking for permission? Is it full set of plans, or is it an inquiry earlier on in the process?
So most projects at this point, because I mean, since 2020, it's been about a year and a half now since the law and ordinance have been taking place. And I think I read them most likely every single day, except maybe on weekends. So since these things were passed, all I do is read them. As soon as a city's ordinance is released, I am reading them because, again, we get a lot of inquiries from all over the state. We try to primarily serve SoCal, although we do have a couple of projects up in NorCal right now. But for the most part, when they are simple enough and I'm already very familiar with the city's rules, we know what's feasible and what isn't. So we'll only propose what we know is feasible with the city. When certain projects get a little tricky in terms of maybe location, if it's, the height limit is a certain factor, we need to make sure it's second story is allowed. If the ordinance isn't super clear, one of us will just hop on the phone with planning if needed to just confirm some feasibility, or if they want to confirm a structure that we've never worked with before. We need maybe make sure that it's a legal permitted structure, whatever it is. If there are anything now that are more unique, we'll just hop on the phone with planning. What we've been running into a little bit with LA, because LA has been, they're not the easiest to reach. You can't just really hop on the phone with planning in Los Angeles. So we'll either put an inquiry in and wait, or sometimes what they end up having us do is you just need to submit plans at this point. So if we strongly feel like, yes, this is feasible, we'll let the property owner know, and it's up to them if they wish to push those plans. Again, that's just for very unique projects. Most of them are simple ones that we know will get approved. So there's no ambiguity or any issues with those.
Perfect. Okay. So in using the scenario, I called you, you look at my idea, my site, come out and look at it. I say, great, let's move forward. So then we're into drawing plans.
Yes, exactly. So basically phase one would begin. There's really only two phases of developing an ADU. Designing and submitting your plans, which are basically, the blueprints, the full set of plans, which is connected with, then once they're approved, you pull that permit. Phase two is the construction. So if you're ready to go, you sign with us, we start with your plans. Our draftsman will go on site, take exact accurate measurements of all of the space or area, whatever it is you want to do. And then we start reviewing the first draft of the design. We work with the owner to really make sure they like the layout of the unit or units that they're doing. Once those layouts and the design are approved, the engineers work on the full set of plans, which are, all of the details for the architectural points, the structural pages and everything like that. Once the full set is ready to go, that's what gets submitted to the city for plan check.
Okay, so a little left turn in an interesting scenario. So I've got an owner that I feel like he can be permitted to do an ADU on his property, who says, absolutely, I do not want to build it. And I thought to myself, well, you may want to entitle it for the process of, if you sell it, you've got a value add waiting for somebody to do it. So in your production process, let's say I may just want I guess my question is, do I pay for the plans or the design process first and then the construction, or is it all one batch? How would I go about helping this owner who says, yeah, I agree, I should get an entitlement to do it, but I'm not going to do it myself? What would you suggest there?
Yeah, we work with both. It's up to the owner. We can provide just phase one, which is your engineering, the architectural structural plans with the permit expediting. So we'll submit it to the city and basically get you all the way to a ready to issue permit. So we work with a lot of projects like that. Sometimes we recommend that too. If you are not sure of the exact layout, size, or design you want, we say just start with plans then. That way you're more in control. You can work with us during the design phase to finally be content with what you're going to get, and just stop there if you'd like. You don't have to sign on for the full package. Some owners prefer that, some don't.
What kind of rough cost would you look at for the design plans phase?
The design plans can range anywhere from, I would say 10K to 20K.
One more question on the scenario I was sharing with you. So let's say you got submitted and approved. What's the window like that you have to build that? Is it in perpetuity that entitlement remains, or is there, is it 2 years, 3 years, 5 years? What would you be looking at long-term if you wanted to do something like that?
Right, so it varies per building and safety department, planning department. Most plans do have an expiration date. Sometimes they expire after 18 months. So you have the issue of your plans expiring, as well as when you pull that permit, sometimes the city expects you to start work within 6 months at least. Sometimes the permit's good for 1 year, sometimes 2 years. It really depends on your city, but there are timelines with those.
I know it's different, obviously, for a garage conversion versus if you were going above elevation. Do you have a rough square footage kind of range on what people can expect for this kind of stuff to build it?
Yeah, it really varies per project and how much buildable space they have. But there is a maximum, of course, that the state does provide. The maximum, no matter, well, I wouldn't say no matter what, typically the maximum is 1,200 square feet. This usually applies for new construction detached units. However, some cities do not have a maximum when it comes to conversions, as long as that space already exists and it's a legal space. So let's say you're a multifamily property with a 6-car garage, for example. Some cities do not cap it. You can use all of that space if you want. The only difference would come down to how many ADUs you can do, which has its own set of rules. But the typical rule of thumb is 1,200. A lot of cities have been saying the maximum is 1,000. Some even say 800, but no more than 1,200 unless your city allows using all of that converted space.
Did I hear in Long Beach that it was a factor or a multiplier of how many units? For example, an 8-unit building, was it the maximum would be like 20% of the existing units to add, for example, like, I guess if you rounded it up, it'd be 2.
No, definitely on the right track. There's a 25% rule all across the board, and that pertains to those conversions that I was mentioning that are part of the primary building. You have a 25% rule, and it's rounded down. So at 8 units, you can do 2. 9 units rounded down, you can still do 2. Once you hit 12 units, then you can technically do 3. And so forth. So, but duplexes to 7 units are allowed at least 1.
But also coexisting with the total maximum square footage. You're basically parsing down smaller and smaller the higher number of units you go.
Exactly. So really space permitting, do you want several smaller units? Do you want 1 or 2 larger? It's up to the owner. The more commonly we do see the more units, the better for owners, because it'll yield them more monthly income than 1 or 2 larger units. So it's really up to the owner's preference and the area too.
Absolutely, yeah. The unit count trumps the larger unit for sure.
Mm-hmm.
More doors. What anticipated changes do you maybe have your ear to the ground to this entitlement? Might you see moving forward? Will this window close partially, fully? Because I'm sure, like everything else, whenever there's a change in real estate usage, there's neighbor resistance, kind of NIMBYism around something like this. Do you hear anything kind of where the ground might be shaking a little bit on the future of this entitlement?
So yes and no, I guess. I mean, with the Senate bills for, or the Assembly bills for the ADUs, they basically did the window from 2020 to 2025. So all of these limited restrictions and eliminations are set to technically expire 2025. And we don't know what they're going to do after that, if they'll renew it, if they will be more restrictive after, we don't know. So at least for now, the ADU rules stand till 2025. However, there is something that we get a lot of questions about, Senate Bill 9 and Senate Bill 10, SB 9 and 10, which have to do with potential lot split opportunities. SB 10 also has, for some properties who qualify, the ability to build 10 units on that property. So the ADU ordinance and law came in with, that, I guess, potential and opportunity for some people, and of course a handful of angry people who don't want this. But then just recently, I think it passed in September and took effect January 1st of this year, is our SB 9 and 10, which allow even more units on the property and the potential to do fourplexes on an R1 zone. So that's even, I would say, piggybacking almost on the ADU rules to allow even more units than the ADUs would allow by itself. So it looks like directionally it's going towards just add to housing for the time being, at least.
Sounds like there's at least a few year window where the status quo will be in place.
Right.
2025, you mentioned. Okay, so here's kind of a little fun question. You've been doing a lot of these. What's the wildest ADU that you've seen built? Like, oh, wow, I can't believe we're going to put it in there.
Let's see. It doesn't get too wild because, again, it is within the parameters and allowance, per city. But at least as far as requests go, we get a lot of, wild requests for building, a third, fourth, fifth story on the building as an ADU, or just vacant lots that they just want to throw ADUs all over it. And you can't do that. You have to have an existing residence on there. Some are just, they want to combine, the entire lot, just make it all a dwelling unit. There's little to no grass or any outdoor space or lot, a lot on the property. Some with ideas of what they want to throw in as many bedrooms as possible and just potentially rent the rooms out individually. So we get a lot of, I guess, wild requests or design requests like that. But it's in terms of actually going through planning, because it's, I don't know if limited is the right word, but there are just so many rules and guidelines for what you are allowed to do. We can only push so many types of designs through planning when it comes down to it. And
again, going back, that's city by city. What ADU1, Helen and the firm ADU1 have is a really great YouTube channel. A huge amount of the cities that we're talking about ADUs in, she elaborates on them. It's a really great resource depending on what city you own in. Highly recommend that you do that. And then, as I mentioned before we close, I want to mention Helen's firm also has a few other divisions that can help apartment owners outside of the ADU side, the soft story or seismic retrofit process. As we mentioned, the balcony inspections. The balconies, as we learned, are already in place statewide. The soft story seismic retrofit very well could make its way to Long Beach, but other cities have already been, a couple years into that. So it's a great resource to have. We would love to have you back on a future episode to kind of maybe touch on those two other ideas. But this ADU thing sounds like the owners that are listening and all the owners throughout Southern California and statewide actually have a couple of years to get their ducks in a row before there could be any sort of systemic change in what they're allowed to do. Definitely. Yeah, I would just say, and not even for a sales gimmick, the earlier the better, because planning can take, upwards to 6, 9 months, 12 months if you have a big project, especially for multifamily properties detached. So planning alone with the cities has been taking quite some time right now. And as everybody has seen, material prices are only going up every quarter, if not month after month. So the prices, unfortunately, that we would give a year ago have definitely increased since then. I think for all companies, though, this is kind of statewide. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The sooner the better. Get your plans at least submitted in the city, and try to just start the sooner the better. Collect that rent, increase housing at the same time, and again, just try to do it sooner than later. Well, it totally makes sense. It really feels like if you're entitled to do this in a way that makes sense on your property, it's a no-brainer. Obviously, you put out an investment. You get a nice return on investment. In most cases, it's going to make sense with the rents where they are in the market. And, what a lot of people seem to forget about is right away, you just added a ton of value to the property. If you're to turn around and sell it 2 days after you get your final permit sign off, you're going to make money on the investment. So it's almost really a no-brainer to do that. And you're a great resource to approach to kind of get that done. So all your information is going to be in the show notes on how to get a hold of you, how to view the YouTube videos, because they're really good. And I really thank you being here today with us.
Of course, thank you so much. I had a great time. Thank you for having me. And I would be honored to come back and maybe help discuss the seismic retrofitting and the balcony inspections.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are timely. They're not as fun as the ADUs because it's not a discretionary income and value upside, more of a compulsory thing. But hey, still, we're faced with these challenges and we need the resources to handle them. And you're definitely one of them. So thanks again. Thank you for listening to the Everything Apartments podcast. I'm your host, Eric Christopher. Stay tuned for another episode coming soon.